Welcome everyone, welcome to the Max Jancar show. Now in this episode, we are going to talk about attachment theory and how it impacts breakups and relationships and even personal development. Now, just so we're all on the same page about what this is, attachment theory is a psychological theory developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and it puts forward, or it itself is, a very solid explanation for why your relationship failed, and it also provides, in this theory, a solution for most, if not all, of your relationship struggles. Now, attachment theory, it essentially talks about how our primary attachment bond, the bond we cultivated during early childhood by how we interact with our parents, how that bond represents a model for our future relationships, and how out of that primary attachment we develop one of four attachment styles: anxious, avoidant, anxious-avoidant, and secure. Now, once these styles are developed, they dramatically influence our mental health, our self-esteem, the partners we choose, how our relationships pan out, and how we, of course, respond when they end. Now, as I said, attachment styles, they begin to form and kind of develop in childhood. Here's kind of the story surrounding this, right? The context, per se. As a kid grows up, they usually want to explore the world around them. But here's the catch. The world can be pretty dangerous, at least most of the time. The chair that the kid tries to climb on can fall. The shiny kitchen stove can burn them. The little dog by the sidewalk may bite their hand off. Like, everything children learn is essentially each step of the way through trial and error. It is a sort of process of trial and error. In other words, young children often fall into behavioral patterns of some sort, and in most cases, they seek security and comfort from their parents. Now, sometimes they want to go and leave, the parents behind, so they can explore this occasionally or often dangerous world. And sometimes, while they are exploring, it becomes really painful and really scary, and suddenly they bolt back to their parents. Now, this is what we call a quote-unquote dance between security and comfort, or insecurity and exploration. Now, this dance between these states, it continues and it expands as the child grows up. Young infants in general need the security of their caretakers more or less all the time. Fair. With only maybe brief flickers of some, self-assured exploration. And older kids need a good amount of both, so they need time to explore, and they also need some security provided by the caretakers. Now, by the time you get to teenagers, it's almost all exploration all the damn time. So in a way, parenting, it comes down to two very important skills. Number one, letting your kids roam and explore when they need to, and number two, providing that safety and comfort when they need you. Now, parents who nail this balance will generally raise emotionally stable and healthy kids who go on to have healthy and stable and emotionally mature romantic relationships later on in life. Now, if you're listening to this, that's probably not you, but that's fine. It wasn't me either. So where the hell do attachment styles come into the equation here? Well, let's actually go and tackle our first one, the anxious attachment style, okay? So, continuing with our parents' upbringing sort of an example, if a parent or if parents, plural, have two jobs, then there are two ways they can screw it up. One way is when a parent doesn't allow their children to explore freely enough or coddles them way too much. Now, these children, they often never fully develop a sense of independence. They grow up feeling as though they always need someone with them in order to feel comfortable and confident, and so they become a likely host for what's called the anxious attachment style. Now, in romantic relationships, anxiously attached people, individuals, right? They are typically pleasers and they often think of themselves as lesser compared to their partner or the person they simply love or are in love with. They're also, because of this, low self-esteem, we may even say. Because of this, they're also very needy, sporadic, neurotic, and need ton of attention and affection pretty much all the damn time. Not to mention approval, validation, reassurance that they're still loved and cared for and respected and valued and so on. Now, as you'd guess, these people, they have a really tough time being alone or even being single, and they often rely on their romantic interest, be that an ex, a current partner, or a date of some sort. They rely on them for their daily dose of happiness because they usually, extreme example, but this is true in most cases, sometimes to larger, sometimes to, just not as large degrees or extreme degrees, but the thing is, they often rely on their romantic interest for happiness because they can't make themselves happy. And therefore, they also tend to get emotionally attached to other people very rapidly and very strongly. So strongly, in fact, that they often push away those that they love most. Now, fine, this is a bunch of theory, I get it. You want probably some practical examples to complement the theory, right? Well, here they are. An anxiously attached person would be someone who would spam their partner's phone, try to control what they're doing or where they're going, and desperately chase after them. This is someone who believes they need to earn sex or love and thus become very needy and constantly try to prove themselves that they are actually worthy of sex and love because deep down they just don't feel worthy of it and so they overcompensate for it, for this insecurity. And finally, one last example, this is also someone who tries to game and manipulate their date so they would stick around. Now, when it comes to their response to breakups, these anxiously attached individuals, they feel the most grief. On average, just talking about average, there are always exceptions, please take note of this, but on average, they are those people that feel the most grief, the most sadness, the most devastation, and are most prone to even becoming depressed after a breakup. And you often see them going either on a dating rampage in hopes of quickly finding someone new and attaching to them ASAP because, like I said, they have a really difficult time being single after a breakup. So you either see them going on these dating rampages, or they try to desperately get back with their ex, and usually because these people are very needy, they fail miserably at the whole thing. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin, the avoidant attachment, the avoidant attachment style, the avoidant attachment person, whatever you want to call it. The point is, if parents screw up the other way, that is, they provide a child lots and lots of freedom to explore, but are very unreliable at being present and offering safety and comfort when the child needs it, that kid will develop this firm, usually even cold independence, and they will grow mistrustful of others. And so, they will become a very likely host for what's called the avoidant attachment style. Now, in romantic relationships, avoidance, right? These are people that generally very quickly feel crowded or smothered or uncomfortable by their partner's affection or intimacy, or displays of affection and intimacy. Maybe that would be a better way to put it. They have a difficult time, obviously, also trusting their partner because they generally just don't trust people as much as, an average person. They often seek isolation, often seek independence to an unhealthy degree, and they often suppress their emotions. And avoidance also simply alienate people because they seek a lot of these things. And sometimes, when you really look at the very extreme ends of the spectrum, when it comes to avoidance, you have even people who construct their entire lifestyle just to avoid any sort of commitment or intimate contact altogether. Anyhow, let's change gear a little bit, and let me go yet again onto the practical side of the avoidant attachment. Like, who is this? What does this even look like, right? Now, this would be someone who, for example, goes on a few dates with a person, but then very quickly starts to get scared or anxious or smothered when the other person starts opening up emotionally, and when the other person starts to actually develop some intimacy with the person with the avoidant attachment. Now, this is also someone who dates their partner regularly but avoids getting physical and intimate with them because they perhaps feel shame around their sexuality or have lots of anxiety about their ability to perform in bed. And finally, this could also be someone who starts feeling very unattracted to just about anyone who treats them with respect and admiration because they themselves don't feel worthy of that respect and admiration. They feel they shouldn't be treated that way. A very interesting psychological phenomenon, which might be a good episode for future podcast episodes. Anyhow, when it comes to how avoidance respond to breakups, now this is kind of a funny response because it pisses off it pisses off most people, especially dumpies who want to get back together with their ex who is maybe an avoidant, right? So what avoidance will do after a breakup, on average, yet again, they will act that they're unaffected by it. And they will usually repress their pain and all their negative feelings and their grief. And as a result, they usually develop some form of trauma or perhaps a set of limiting beliefs. And then they subject themselves to even random spurts of intense emotions or temper tantrums because every feeling, when you push it in, when you suppress it, when you hold it in, right, it needs an outlet of some sort. That is key. And if you keep suppressing your feelings, what will eventually happen is that they will grow and grow and grow. They will pile up on each other, and they just will have to somehow be released. And that's when they will explode, quote unquote. They will burst through your psychological outlet, and you will perhaps lash out and have, like I mentioned earlier, which is very common for avoidance, some sort of a temper tantrum. But now let's talk about the worst of both worlds. Is it the worst of is it the best of both worlds? No, in this case, it's the worst of both worlds. The anxious-avoidant attachment style. Now, here's the theory behind this one, right? If parents completely failed at both of their jobs, and to remind you, they failed to show comfort and support, and they failed to give their child the freedom to explore. If that's the case, that child might very well end up with an anxious avoidant attachment style where they basically desperately crave attention and affection at all times, yet trust no one and feel intense anxiety around everyone. Now, to give you a few examples of anxious avoidance, this is someone who wants to get emotionally close to their partner, but they worry that that partner is going to hurt their feelings if they do actually open up. This is someone who wants to feel close to their partner, but at the same time just can't trust them enough to want to be close to them, emotionally that is, and sometimes even physically. This is someone who can't live without their partner even though their relationship is clearly not working or is dysfunctional and toxic. And finally, let's actually turn the page to the quote-unquote good or healthy attachment style, the secure one. So the theory behind it is that if a kid grew up with parents who nailed both of their jobs, to remind you, letting them roam and explore when they need to, and providing safety and comfort when the kid needs it. If that's the case, the child likely grew up with a secure attachment style. Now, in romantic relationships, people with a secure attachment style are generally comfortable displaying interest and affection. They are also comfortable just being alone and independent, and they can correctly prioritize their relationships within their life, and they tend to draw very clear personal boundaries and stick to them. Now, obviously, secure attachments or secure attachment types, they make for the best romantic partners, family members, even friends, because they are also very good at accepting rejection and moving on despite any sort of pain. And on the flip side, they can be loyal and they can sacrifice their wants when that is truly necessary. They have also, as you'd expect, very few issues trusting people that they're close to and are trustworthy themselves. Now, secure, that's what you want to be in order to have healthy, thriving relationships. And we're gonna talk about how to go from any shade of a insecure attachment style, so a anxious attachment style, an avoidant, or an anxious avoidant one. We're gonna talk about how to transition to a secure style in just a few minutes. But first, I want to go over a few other very important influences on one's attachment style that you should be aware about. And these are genetics, these are peer groups, and these are previous romantic relationships. Now, starting with genetics. Okay, to just get the obvious out of the way, no, genetics don't determine everything about you and how you approach relationships and what your attachment style is, but they are important. For example, if a person is very independent and refuses to be held down by commitments, so they're leaning towards avoidant attachment, right? They're leaning towards avoidance, then this person is likely genetically wired to be this way to a degree. Same story for a person who always wants to be the center of attention. They're probably programmed to lean to these more anxious tendencies. Now, the annoying thing about genetics is that, well, we can't really change them. We can only accept them whether they're good or bad. In other words, we're not to blame for our genetics, but it is our responsibility to do the best with what we have been given. And likewise, we need to set proper expectations based on our genetic makeup. So, to put it another way, if you're someone very social, who has a string of very social siblings and ancestors, you've got to accept that you'll never be a hardcore, independent, introverted person. Similarly, if you are highly independent, you are very introverted, you must accept that you'll never be a natural social butterfly, and that's fine. Now, as for the second big influence, peer groups So the theory here goes that if you grew up in an environment where making friends was a pain in the ass, then you have probably developed a lot of avoidant attachment tendencies, which usually lead to avoidant attachment. However, if you grew up in an environment where everyone was safe and connected, perhaps even an environment where everyone looked and dressed and acted the same way, you likely developed a lot of anxious attachment tendencies, which usually lead to an anxious attachment. And finally, there's previous romantic relationships, right, that influence your attachment style. So if you basically were in a relationship before your ex, or maybe even for this relationship specifically that you're trying to overcome at the moment, right? If you were in a relationship with a highly controlling and overbearing partner for an extended period, that may exacerbate your insecurity and your, attachment issues. And it could also prompt you to become wildly self-sufficient and cautious when you decide to date someone new later on. That is, it could prompt you to essentially develop a more avoidant of an attachment style. And in a similar vein, spending many years in a relationship with a partner who is absent, who frequently distances themselves from you, or who is never reliable, that may cause you to develop an anxious attachment style. Now here's the nasty thing about attachments. The insecurely attached, so the anxious, the avoidant, and the anxious-avoidant, they often end up dating one another, and they create this dumpster fire of a relationship. Here's how this usually pans out. The generally more anxious person is drawn to the generally more avoidant, because when they withdraw, they trigger the anxious person's fear of abandonment, creating this cycle of seeking reassurance and validation. And this dynamic initially fulfills their attachment needs because the anxious feels temporarily soothed when the avoidant, momentarily engages in closeness. But sooner or later, the avoidant withdraws, which intensifies the anxious person's need for closeness. And what do you know? Then the chaser cycle begins. One person keeps pursuing closeness and intimacy, while the other person keeps running away from closeness and intimacy. And it's this cycle, while it does feel exciting at times, that only creates emotional instability and insecurity in a relationship. Because look, the anxious person constantly feels neglected and rejected, while the avoidant person constantly feels suffocated and overwhelmed. And eventually the toxicity, the chaser-chasey dynamic, it becomes fucking unbearable, and the relationship ends in a breakup, or worse, the two incompatible idiots stay together, perpetually locked in this mixture of resentment and drama and misery and just bullshit. Now, okay, how the hell do you change your attachment style if, after hearing all of this shit, you've perhaps concluded that you have some anxious or some avoidant tendencies? Maybe you are actually an anxious or an avoidant person, someone with an actual attachment style, an insecure attachment style developed. How do you then change that? How do you overcome that and become more secure? And as a result, more confident, more attractive, and way more capable of either finding lasting love after your breakup now, or getting back with your ex. How the hell do you fucking do it? Okay, step one, there's not really any steps, but I'm just saying, you start with figuring out exactly what attachment style you harbor in the first place. The best way to do this, I know you're gonna hate this answer because it's a bit expensive, go to therapy. Get a therapist to talk to you and ask them if they can identify or help you identify your attachment style. Alternatively, you can also use one of the online self-identification quizzes. Just type attachment style quiz into Google and you will find one, okay? Very important. Now, another thing to note when you're trying to figure out your attachment style, and even when you're trying to change it, is that secure individuals can have both anxious and avoidant tendencies. So you can be fundamentally secure, but still, for instance, avoid commitment or intimacy, or you sometimes occasionally worry about whether you are lovable or not. It's not a binary thing. Attachment is not a binary thing, so you're either one attachment or the other. It's usually a spectrum. There's a lot of gray areas in between avoidant and anxious, and avoidant anxious extremes, I guess. And that's normal. Now, when it comes to the actual transition, let's take it actually bit by bit. Let's first start by talking about how to go from an anxious attachment style to a secure one. Then we'll go and talk about how to go from an avoidant to a secure one. And then we're going to talk about how to go from an anxious avoidant to secure. So let's begin with going from anxious to secure. Here are a couple of rapid fire style or machine gun style tips. First one, find what triggers your anxiety and become aware of when you're feeling it. So the idea is that once you figure out what triggers your anxiety, whether it's a person, a specific behavior, an environment, you can try and find ways to eliminate those triggers. And when you become aware of your anxiety, you can manage it better. Very important word here, manage it better. Here's why it's so important. A lot of people think that they can just control their emotions, that they can somehow win over them. If that's even a word, I think it is. I think you get what I mean. The truth is, you cannot control your emotions. Emotions are always going to go where they want to go. And the only thing you really have control over is the behaviors your emotions elicit. The behaviors, that's where you can say, hey, I know I'm feeling anger right now, but instead of kicking my dog in the face, I'm gonna call up a good friend. That's the extent to where you can, I guess, control yourself. But you can't really control your emotions, to be specific. Just pointing that out there, a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a very important point to grasp. Okay, the next tip is to leverage proven healing modalities. Try meditation, try journaling, yoga, qigong, dream reporting. There's also a bunch of self-love practices, and there's also, of course, good old gratitude practices. Try all of these modalities, stick with them for at least maybe 2-3 weeks, stick with them, like all of them, and then see how they make you feel and whether they actually help you or not. Because usually, they work for most people, but sometimes, because we're all different, meditation, for example, might work better for one person than journaling. And so they can just double down on meditation and they can quit journaling perhaps altogether, and they will get results in their transition to a secure attachment style. Another tip, look for overreactions to certain situations, right? Be, again, very aware of how you behave. Then try to see those overreactions when they do come, and they will appear eventually, for what they are. Just overreactions. Now, a good way to make this a daily habit is to consistently, when you're anxious and you're feeling insecure, right? Ask yourself, is it reasonable to feel so anxious or insecure right now at this moment? Or is my anxious attachment style playing tricks on me? Now, as for the final tip, date someone with a secure attachment style, because this will allow you to absorb some of their security and grow more secure yourself. Now there's more. Let's talk about going from avoidant to secure, right? Okay, tip number 1, practice vulnerability. Get used to repeatedly opening up about the views and the beliefs you hold and the things you're most afraid or uncomfortable to express. Even the things you are ashamed of expressing. Try to get into a habit of continually expressing them. So for example, when you meet up with a good friend, and after a few minutes of banter, maybe share some of your deeper, more personal thoughts and opinions with them. For a start, that's a good practice. Something you perhaps haven't shared before that is a bit uncomfortable. The other thing you can do is practice self-awareness. Very similar to what I talked about when it comes to going from anxious to secure. Try to notice your avoidant tendencies in your interactions. Try to notice when you're trying to close off, when you're trying to run away from intimacy, when you're trying to run away from connection. And instead of closing off when those interactions happen, make a conscious choice to open up even more. Now asking yourself, do I feel alarmed for a good reason, or are my avoidant tendencies getting the best of me? That helps as well. And finally, the same tip I gave before when it comes to anxious to secure transition, date someone with a secure attachment style. Again, this will allow you to absorb some of their security and grow more secure yourself. Go and find and date these people, even if, to put a very important point here, even if you want your ex back. Because I know a lot of you listening to this podcast, you guys and gals want your ex back. But the thing is, it's going to be best for your attraction as well as your recovery to date after your breakup other people and not just, wait for your ex to give you another shot or whatever. But anyway, let's talk about the final transition, going from anxious-avoidant to secure. Obviously, the tip here is gonna be practice everything I mentioned till now. Vulnerability, awareness, self-examination, healing modalities, dating someone secure, very important, and, of course, seek out a therapist. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Anxious avoidance is the rarest and most complicated attachment type, and the average person, regardless of what, breakup experts and coaches want you to believe, they will not be able to just change it alone or through, coaching. Most often, professional intervention is required. And this does not mean, to reiterate, a coach or some ex-back expert. This would mean a therapist, a counselor, someone who actually studies or has studied psychology. So that's it for the transitions. Before we end this little pod, just a couple of words of encouragement and a couple of maybe warnings. Regardless of your attachment style, the road to changing one that is insecure into one that is secure, right? It means you will inevitably bump and crash into some obstacles on this road of changing your attachment styles. Like sometimes, a person with an anxious attachment style will reach out to their ex even though they know they shouldn't. They will seek a date's validation and maybe blow up their phone. Maybe they will show up at their doorstep unannounced at like 3 a.m. with chocolate and roses in hand, even though they know that's very needy and unattractive. Other times, avoidance will go on this bad crushing, come all over the wall rampage, dating rampage with total strangers that they don't give two shits about, just to push down their grief, just to suppress their emotions and forget that this breakup ever happened. And that's fine. People lose control of their attachment car all the damn time. And when it happens to you, and believe me, it's gonna happen to you sooner or later, just don't beat yourself up about it. When you bump into your next obstacle, just, put the bitch in reverse, adjust course, center grill, slam the living shit out of that gas pedal, and continue with the journey. Continue with the transition. Don't let one obstacle suddenly derail you and permanently, terminate this process of becoming better, becoming secure, becoming a more resilient, mature, and functional person. So that's the thought I want to leave you with. Be prepared to fail when you're trying to go from insecure to secure attachment. But believe me, even though there will be a couple of obstacles, ultimately it's so fucking worth it, because you will not only get better, your relationships will get better. And I'm talking all relationships, not just romantic ones. I'm talking familial relationships and even friendships. So that's pretty much it. That's all from my side. If you want to stay in touch, if you want to go deeper into my work, my newsletter is the best starting point. It's called the Breakthrough Letter, and all that it is a weekly email with one idea, one suggestion, and one resource to help you break through your breakup and create a new possibility for love, be that with your ex or with someone completely brand new. So if you want all of that, if it sounds interesting, go to maxjancar.com/letters. That's maxjancar.com/letters, as in a letter you send to your aunt or something. And that's pretty much it for this pod episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in, and take care.